Jamie, I'm from Texas and I grew up with guns. I own several, but honestly, I did not recognize those sounds. The idea that there might be an assassin in my own house, it just didn't make any sense. So,
Kent, welcome to the happy hour.
hey, thank you, Jamie. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, I'm so happy to have you here. And this is a podcast conversation that has been in the making for a long time. And I'll tell you why,
Yes, it
Kent.
has.
All the time, I get your newsletters and your information. And every single time, Aaron and I read it and we reminisce and we think like, oh my gosh, it would be so great to sit down and have lunch. And then I'm like, I've got to have Kent on the happy hour. And so I just want to tell you, I'm really glad this is happening.
Well, this is something I've looked forward to for a long time as well. We go back, like I said, a long time, back to when Aaron was fronting Spur 58, the rock band,
Yes.
Christian band, and
Yes.
how Aaron became friends with my son Kevin. And
Hmm.
I don't know, I followed you guys from a distance for a long time, and I just want to say how grateful I am for the witness that you all provide from your
Mm.
family and the way you live your life. And it doesn't surprise me at all the way the happy hour is taken off because people want to hear the uh, the story that you guys are living. And
Mm.
um, so I'm tickled. I'm glad to be here, and I
Well,
hope your tribe will give me some grace here.
my tribe is going to love you. I'll tell you that much. And you're right. Okay, so we go back a long time. In fact, we were at a same church together, and my husband Aaron, like you said, was in a
Mhm.
band and student ministry, and um, a friend, leader, mentor to one of your kids, and we had moved
Yes,
away
he
when
was.
tragedy struck your family, and
Uh-huh.
I remember we were in outside of Nashville when we got the news about what your family walked through. And so, Ken, I want to talk to you today a lot about forgiveness. And forgiveness is this it's this very Christian word. It's like, okay, so we need to forgive, and there's all kinds of phrases like forgive and forget, or forgive as you would want
Hmm.
those to forget, all the things. But then there are times in life where the rubber meets the road and that
Hmm.
forgiveness becomes this reality that is not just words that we say, but it's actually a life that we live. And I've watched you from afar do that and talk about it and inspire others. So before we get to forgiveness, I want to set the stage. So let's set the stage for the listeners about what happened to your family in December of 2003. If you could set the stage for us, that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, that was the beginning of my journey of forgiveness, and it started on December 10th of 2003, like you say, when my wife Tricia called to say that our older son Bart had finished his finals and wanted to go out and celebrate his upcoming college graduation. So we went out and had a great dinner, and when we came back, our younger son Kevin, who was a sophomore in college, stepped up to the front door and walked inside, and there was a loud noise. And Tricia, who was right behind him, said, "Oh no," and another loud noise. Now, uh, Jamie, I'm from Texas, and I grew up with guns. I own several, but honestly, I did not recognize those
Mm,
sounds. The idea that there might be an assassin in my own house, it just didn't make any sense. So I stepped up to look inside to see what was going on.
mhm.
And there was a man standing there, I don't know, 5 or 6 feet away, really close, with a ski mask on. And you would think I would snap at that point, but it still didn't make any sense. And
Mhm.
I wondered which one of Kevin's goofball friends is playing a trick on us with the paintball gun or something. And
Mhm.
well, the next moment I got hit hard in the chest right here, and I fell back on the front porch and I couldn't get up.
Mm.
And that was when I realized that those sounds had been gunshots, and there had been three of them, one for each of us. And before I could call out to warn Bart, there was a fourth shot, and I thought he shot all of us.
Mm.
Why? Um, and you know, as large as your listening group is, I know that there's got to be some people out there that have experienced thinking that they were about to die. And
Mhm.
it surprised me. I mean, oh, wow, here it is. But I was totally at peace, and I told God,
Mm.
if this was my time, I was ready, but to please protect my family.
Mm.
And I called out to each one of them, but got no response except for some quiet, wet coughs coming from Tricia.
Mm.
And I'd never heard those kind of coughs before, but I instinctively knew that they were the sound of someone trying to clear their lungs from filling with blood. So I don't know how far you want me to
Mm.
take the story because,
Yeah, keep going because I can't even imagine what you must have been feeling and thinking, not being able to move, knowing there were 4
mhm,
shots, and then how do you even get up to take care of your family?
yeah, yeah. Well, I couldn't, and so I called out, and like I said, I couldn't. Nobody responded.
Mm.
Uh, well, about that point, the police started arriving. Neighbors had heard the gunshots and called, and then three paramedics were working on me, trying to keep me alive. But nobody would tell me anything about my family until
Mm.
I overheard a couple of policemen as they were rushing inside the house. One of them said, "Hey, what do you want to do about the DOA, which
Mm.
is dead on arrival?"
Mhm.
And that's how I learned that at least one, and I didn't know, maybe by now all of my family was dead.
Mm.
So I started shaking and I realized I was going into shock.
Mm.
Well, Trish and I were taken by two Life Flight helicopters to Houston's medical center, and Bart arrived there a few minutes later by ambulance because he'd been shot, supposedly wrestling with the shooter.
Mhm.
Later, I learned that they had stopped working on Tricia about halfway through the flight, and
Mm.
Kevin had died almost instantly right
Mm.
inside my front door. Later that night, when I was finally alone in my hospital room and I was struggling with my faith for all of this, because I mean, my emotions were all over the place, but they always came back to this desire for revenge. And
Mm.
I just wanted to hurt this person who had, you
Mhm.
know, murdered my wife and son.
Mhm.
And I was very mad at God too, not just for letting this happen, but mainly because I thought he was lying to me. Because there's a verse in the Bible that have been a real comfort to me in the past, and I'd used it many times in helping other people, but I couldn't apply it to myself that night. It just wouldn't. I just couldn't do it. And that's Romans 8:28, and that verse says that, and we know that God takes all things and works them for good for those who love Him and are called to His
Mm.
service. And I thought, is that even possible here?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was a lie because there's no way that God could take the murders of my wife and son and work them
Mhm.
for good. But
Mm.
but it was in the Bible, so what was I going to do? You know,
Mm.
that was the hard thing.
Kent, I have a question for you as I'm listening to you tell this
Uh-huh.
story. And you get to the hospital, and at this point that you're wrestling with this, you are aware that Trisha and Kevin have both passed away.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that you are aware that Bart is on his way to the hospital as well. So
Yeah, he had already arrived.
he had already
He'd gotten
arrived.
there
Okay.
too. Hmm.
Okay, so you're in the room and you're wrestling, and I think that that wrestling is something that we can all relate to, although maybe a small percentage of us have wrestled with that after parts of our family have been murdered in our own home right before our eyes.
Hmm.
But I want to ask you about that wrestling. As you were
Hmm.
in that hospital room and you're wrestling, and you've been a
Hmm.
follower of Jesus for a really long time, what kept you like clinging to him in that moment? Like you're having these moments of like, God, I've clung to this verse for so long and now I don't
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
What was the conversation you were having with God in that room?
Well, I was thinking, if this isn't true, if I
Mhm.
can't rely on Romans 8:28 to be true, I'm just wondering what else was I believing that would turn out to be a
Mm,
lie just when I needed it.
mm,
And so I realized pretty quickly that my choice was going to be to either somehow or another trust him in this or throw the whole Bible out, because how do
mm,
you know where to start cutting?
right.
And I I knew that I needed God now more than I ever had in my entire
Mm,
life. And
mhm.
so I basically kind of said, God, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I'm going to trust you to take these murders and work them for good
Mm.
somehow, some way. But see, that's what
You
faith
said
is.
that is what faith is. You're right. Yeah, you said in
Yeah.
that you said that you were also wrestling with revenge. And
Yes.
I think that that is a very common thing, Kent, as you're laying in that room knowing
Yeah.
I just witnessed a man with a ski mask point a gun at every single one of people in my family, all four of us, and two of them did not come out of my house. What were you thinking? What did revenge look like for you?
Honestly, what I wanted to do was to just hurt him over and over
Mm,
again. Uh, Wait till he recovered enough to feel and then start hurting me. I mean, it was the most horrible uh,
mhm.
vision of what Kent would look like that I can
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah.
I didn't know why he had done this, but I knew that the rest of my life was changed forever.
Mhm.
And uh, uh, but I think that's you. You're right. This is a very, I mean, this is the common thing because forgiveness goes completely against our natural feelings, our
Yeah.
natural man, because that says you turn around and hurt them back. You don't
Yeah.
forget them. You don't forgive
Right.
them, and
Yeah.
so that's one of the reasons why forgiveness is so hard because it's just so unnatural.
It doesn't make sense, you
No,
know?
it doesn't.
I wanna fill in a couple of holes for the listeners, in case they missed this.
Mm-hmm.
The person who pulled the trigger, who murdered, two of your family members, at this point, do you know about him? Is he alive? Do you know, have they got him? What do you know right now as you're wrestling with these thoughts of revenge?
What I know is that uh, there were four shots. I landed on the front porch, uh, and within 3 minutes, the police were there, and they secured the house in probably a minute and a half, 2 minutes. So I knew that the shooter wasn't there. Uh,
Mhm.
I didn't know who it was. I just knew they were gone.
Mhm. Mhm. Now you have this moment, not only are you wrestling through Romans 8:28, but you're also wrestling with forgiveness. And you had something feels a little supernatural to me, especially the conversation we just
Hmm.
had about how forgiveness is so against our human nature. Our human nature does
Yeah.
lean towards revenge. That's the flesh inside of us that we
Uh-huh.
want. Tell us about your moment when you said when you chose forgiveness.
Okay. Okay. It came as a result of me making a decision to trust that he would somehow, I didn't know how,
Mm,
be able to apply Romans 8:28 to my situation. And that decision changed my life's trajectory
mm,
forever. It's why I'm here today. It's why I'm married today. Um, it's it totally changed everything because the moment that I trusted him in the Romans 8:28 thing, the first of two very strange things, like you said, there's kind of spooky supernatural happened. And the first one was that he placed a specific word for word sentence in my mind. Now, this had happened to me once before, but normally when I speak to God or hear Him, it's when I'm praying and there'll be a quiet whisper in the back of my mind or something, or maybe I'll be reading the Bible and a verse will just kind of jump off the page at me. But this was a word for word sentence, and the sentence was, "Good. Now, what about the shooter?"
mm,
Which was such a weird question. But reading between the lines, I realized what he was doing, I think, was encouraging me for trusting him in the Romans 8:28 thing and saying, "Are you going to trust me in the really hard things? Things
mm,
like vengeance is mine, says the Lord." And I realized where he was going with this. He was asking me to forgive this person, and I
mm,
knew I couldn't do it. But it was also so clear to me that that was what he was wanting me to do. And you talk about between a rock and a hard place. I
Mhm.
wanted to be faithful to what God tells me to do, but I knew I couldn't do this. And so
Mm.
I said, Father, if you truly want me to forgive this person, I'm going to ask you to help me because you know me, you built me. This is beyond my design specs. And but I'm going to ask you to forgive me and forgive them. And if you want me to, you're going to have to do the work.
Mm.
You're going to have to do the heavy lifting. And the instant that I settled that in my mind, the second thing happened, and it was so bizarre. I certainly cannot explain how that happened, but immediately I felt what I can only describe as a warm, golden glow flow from head to foot. And when it left, it took all of the anger and the hatred and the desire for revenge with it. And
Mm.
in its place was a complete and total forgiveness for everyone involved. And that terrified me. I had no idea what was going on. I'd never heard of anything like that.
Yeah.
I'd certainly never experienced it. And yet, when I really paused and took a look at it, I realized this was real. This actually happened. Now, why he chose to give me that miracle instant forgiveness, I had no idea.
Mm.
But then again, Jamie, I didn't know why I was still alive because I
Mhm.
honestly should have died that night.
Yeah. I think it's not ironic that God's reminding you about this forgiveness and asking you to do it. And you, in honest, like human, trusting God form, say, okay, I will, but I'm going to make you do the heavy lifting on this, God. I need you to do this for
Hmm.
me. And then he did that for you in the next instant and gave you that
Yes.
ability. Now, Kent, that sounds great. And this is amazing. And that is wonderful, but you had no idea what the next year and a half,
No.
2 years, next 7 months, whatever would hold for you. Talk to us about what those next
Okay.
what did life bring you when you exited the hospital, already making this declaration that you were going to
Yeah.
forgive and not have
Well,
revenge.
God, I think, has perfect timing in things. And while I didn't understand why he was doing this, why he chose to do this miracle instant forgiveness thing, it was necessary for him to do that because of what was going to happen in the next 7 or 8 hours.
Mm,
Because when I woke up the next morning, I found out that the police had found out that Bart was not about to graduate from college. In fact, he wasn't even in school that semester. And he had become their number one suspect for having arranged the murders. Now, they
mm,
thought it was to cover up for failures in school. Now we know that he had a serious mental illness, but nobody knew that back then.
mhm,
I mean, back then, I didn't believe he was involved at all. But
mm,
I did know that his faith was not as strong as Trish's or Kevin's or mine. And if he was going to be the focus of an investigation that might actually lead to a trial one day, I knew that he needed someone in his corner, someone that he could trust to walk through it with him. And if by chance he was involved in some way, what I knew was that he needed someone who could display God's unconditional love and forgiveness that God has for all of us, even
mm,
murderers.
mm,
So uh, I realized that the only way I would ever be able to display that kind of unconditional love would be um, to have that miracle forgiveness happen before I ever found out that it might involve my own son.
mm,
And it made me think about the parable that Jesus told in Luke 15 about the prodigal son. And in that story, there was a young man who demanded his inheritance early, and he ran off for a life of wine, women, and song, and soon blew through all of his money. But his dad, who still loved him, even though he he sees all the folly here, He's been praying that the kid will come back to his senses and return home. And when he does, the dad rushes out and, and hugs him and welcomes him back into the family. And the important thing to note is that the father in this story stands for how God, our Father, loves us unconditionally and forgives us when we return to him. And I realized that if I was ever going to be able to display that kind of love, I had to have the forgiveness issue and the uh, anger issue and all of the uh, um, all the negative thoughts that went with knowing that your son might have been responsible for the
Mm,
murder of his brother and mother. That had to be out of the way because there was no way I could fake it. Uh,
that is
and I realized
supernatural,
that
Kent. It really is.
absolutely, without
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, this is a hole that I actually think I don't know in this story is when you woke up that next day, you were informed by the police that that your son was a part of. They were investigating him.
Yes, it was the next day.
Was
They
this public
visited
knowledge or
me.
just given to you?
No, just me. That morning, they visited me and questioned me some more, and they left. And they came back a couple of hours later, and that's when they told me that they'd contacted Bart's school, and they found out
Mm-hmm.
that he wasn't enrolled. And
Mm-hmm.
they never said, he's our suspect, but it was real clear to me that that's
Mm-hmm.
what was happening. Um, and for the next 7 months, they did not arrest him. They did not charge him. They did not tell him that he couldn't leave town. Um, but they tried to get me to abandon him by telling me that I was in danger and he was responsible. And I said, well, oh, that's fine, but you're going to have to give me some reason to accept your story. Uh, but otherwise, I'm not going to abandon my son just because you need to find someone to blame this on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, if I see anything, I will. I'm a law and order guy, and if I see something, I will let you know. But until I have some reason to believe that this is true, I am not going to abandon my son.
Did you wonder if it was true? I mean, did you
Uh,
in those 7 months? I mean, you had chosen to forgive
yes,
for sure, but there's no indictment in
uh,
these 7 months. You know, there's
no.
no.
It was very quickly, very soon, within a few days. Um, that maybe even less than that. Jamie, it's kind of all jumbled up, but it didn't take long for me to realize that there was a good chance that I
Mm,
didn't know how the involvement would be or what the involvement was, but there was a good chance that he was involved and that he was lying, continuing to lie to me about being not, being innocent of the charges. But again, I'm his dad, and
mm-hmm.
just like I said in the parable, I see all the folly, but I
Mm-hmm.
still love my son,
Mm-hmm.
and I want him, even though his faith is not as strong as it should be. I want him to know that there's a God in heaven who
Mm,
forgives everything. I mean, he's hanging there on the cross,
mm-hmm.
about to leave this earthly world, and a guy on his left says, "Hey," to the other guy who's on his
Mm-hmm.
right, said, "Hey, we belong here. He hasn't done anything. He's innocent." And Jesus looked at him, a murderer probably, because he was being executed,
Mm-hmm.
said, "Hey, today, because of your faith, you're going to be with me in paradise." So
Mm-hmm.
God forgives us if we truly repent. And I wanted Bart to have an opportunity to repent if he was involved.
Mm. So this next 7 months, you and Bart are living together in your house, and you've told the
Mm-hmm.
authorities, "Listen, I'm here. I'm not abandoning my son. If I see something, I'll let you know."
Mm-hmm.
Still, maybe thinking there's probably something, but you nothing has been said. And then, what happens at 7 month mark?
Okay. The police were starting to close in, And one night, Bart went downstairs, out of the house, and out of my life. I didn't know where
Mm,
he'd gone. Now, later, I learned he'd run off to Mexico. And 15 months after he disappeared, he was arrested and brought back to Texas to face trial. And here's something that does bother me. Um, for a year and a half, all of my family, all of Trisha's family, and I, every victim in this crime, truly pleaded with the district attorney to accept two back-to-back 40-year
mm,
life in prison sentences in return for Bart's guilty plea so that we could avoid a trial. They
mhm,
wouldn't accept that, and they wouldn't back away from pursuing the death penalty. And so he was eventually convicted and sentenced to death. And that's when, I mean, if you thought my life had fallen apart, that
mhm.
that is really when everything just my life was a bag of broken glass, Jamie.
Mm, mm. Because now you're
I was
looking at the
all alone.
fact that, yeah, now you're looking at the fact that that is all alone. You and I both live in Texas,
Hmm.
and the criminal justice system here is not shy about what just happened to
Hmm.
your son. And
Hmm.
you know, I think I read somewhere, you can tell me if I got this wrong, that the shooter actually was given a way less sentence than Bart was as the conspirator to this crime. Am I right about that?
Yes, yeah. He
Yeah.
was allowed to plead to one count of murder, not capital murder, but
Mhm.
but first degree murder, and was given a 30-year sentence, which means he'll probably serve 15 years, which means that he'll be out soon. And
Mhm.
that's fine with me. I told the the young man who drove the getaway car, so there was three of them involved in this. I told both him and the shooter that I was I was so sorry for their bad choices, but that their their choices were theirs, and that they were going to have to pay the penalty for their choices. But at the same time, I wanted both of them to have an opportunity to live a life where they could make a difference, a positive difference. And the driver is out, has been out for a couple, 3 years now. And I have not talked to him, but I have talked to the guy that he works for. And uh, I gave my blessing to him.
Mm,
And he's told me about how great the kid is doing.
mm,
And I know that the shooter, through Kairos Ministry, which is a Christian ministry inside the prison systems, I know from that the shooter has has given his life to Christ and is totally on fire and is a totally changed young man.
mm,
And
mm,
so whether he gets out in 30 years or 15 years or 20 years or whatever it is, I want him to be able to spend what's left of his life in a way that redeems as much of it as
mm.
possible.
Do
And
you see
so
Romans 8:28 on any of their lives?
I don't have enough information about their life to know, but the fact that what I have heard tells me that yes, there is definitely a God has taken what was a horrible thing that night and has perhaps even pulled two lives from a eternity away from God to one where they will be in heaven with Kevin and Tricia and me and hopefully
Mhm,
Bart, uh,
mhm.
where we are all side by side singing praises to the Lord. And that's what I hope. I hope that they spend eternity there.
Isn't it crazy that that got me a little choked up? It's just crazy that that we serve a God who
Oh
can
gosh,
unite
yes.
so many people with different backgrounds. And it's just crazy to think that that his forgiveness towards us is not just for us who have been quote unquote better here and not done any of the
Hmm.
quote unquote big sins, but we serve a God. You know, I we talk about forgiveness a lot, and you had that supernatural moment there in the hospital, and it's changed your
Hmm.
life in ways you could have never imagined, not only with your own son, but also with the two young men that you said were the shooter and the getaway driver.
Hmm.
And I'm sure that this is something that you will probably spend the rest of your life talking about forgiveness. And,
Hmm.
what I'm hearing from you is that forgiveness is not the same as like forgetting. And I think a lot of people
Oh
would
gosh.
say, yeah, you live this every day of your
Yeah.
life. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people would say, I don't know that I could ever forgive. Like, I guess I would just love for you to talk to the listener of what does forgiveness mean and what does it not mean? Like, what are the things that it
Great.
is and is not?
Honestly, that is the most important part of the talk. Once you get, once you understand that there is a God that will forgive you for whatever it is you've done, then being able to forgive someone who's hurt you is the next most important part of the
Mm,
talk, I think. And so what I want to do is I want to go give you a couple of tools that you can use that will work every time for forgiveness. And then I'm going to
mhm,
talk about some things that confuse us about forgiveness, which is are huge impediments for being able to forgive someone.
mm,
The very best way to begin the forgiveness process is to write yourself a long note. I want you to list everything that they have taken from you in detail. And when you can't think of anything else, you get down to the bottom of that and you say, and I choose to forgive you for all of them, whether you can do this yes or yet or not, and you probably can't, but write that out and sign it.
mm,
And here's why this works. Most of the time when somebody hurts us really badly, we can't take it all in at once because it's too painful. And besides that, there's usually some collateral damage that comes along a little bit later that we don't realize right away. So that letter may take you a week, maybe longer to complete, but it's important that you do complete it because
mm,
we can't forgive something until we acknowledge that the loss exists.
mm,
I used to have a friend, and she claimed to have forgiven her dad for some really awful things as a child, and yet she was still trapped in her brokenness because there were some consequences of his actions that she just cannot get her head around. And it's hard writing that letter out, but it's necessary.
mm,
Otherwise, we don't ever. That's what brings us to the full realization of our loss, and
mm.
that's what's important. Um,
Yeah.
to That's what's important. You have to
Uh,
recognize that the loss
yeah.
exists. Now, you don't have to mail a letter. Nobody else has to ever see it.
Right.
It's for you. Uh, but it is important that you sign it because that
Mm,
makes it a promise to yourself to do that.
mm. After writing that letter and working through forgiveness, what else would you say to someone?
Well, there's another tool that you can use that's really very effective. Um, it's when you know where God wants you to be, but you can't get there yet, so you pray to ask Him, or you ask Him to help you get there. My wife Tanya likes to call this praying backwards. It's where
Mm,
you go to where you know God wants you to be, but you can't get to yet, and you
mm,
ask Him to go into your heart and change you from the inside so that you want to forgive. You might pray something like this for 30 days or 60 days or whatever. God, I know you want me to forgive this guy, but I can't do it yet. Change me from the inside so that I want to forgive.
mm,
And I think that that's a prayer that God is always
mhm.
going to answer because that's His
Yeah.
goal for us. He wants us to
Mhm.
forgive.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, there are some misunderstandings about forgiveness that I think really get in the way of people
Mhm.
forgiving.
Yeah.
And the first one is the forgive and forget thing, because uh, that just that's just not that's just not true.
Yeah.
We only forget things that are trivial, and if you were abused as a child, that's not trivial.
Mm,
In fact, there's some things that are so big that I think that if we could forget them, it'd really be a case of denial and not forgiveness at all, like
mm,
my friend and her dad. See, some people don't want to forgive because they think it means that they have to forget what the other
Mhm.
person did. And that's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes, sometimes you need to remember so that you can build healthy boundaries to protect yourself so
Mhm.
that you don't get hurt again.
Yeah.
That's the first one. There's
Yeah.
five, and that's the first one.
Sometimes
Um,
also I
the,
wonder if you have on there, Kent, that people think forgiveness means that the person didn't do anything wrong and that you're okay with what happened. Not only just
that's
forgetting,
num
but you're like, "That's that number 2?"
Yeah, that's number three.
Okay, okay,
but
okay.
we can go directly to number three. Number number three says that forgiveness does not mean that the other person is off the hook for what they've done.
Mm,
It doesn't justify what they did, and it certainly doesn't cancel uh, the consequences of what they
mhm,
did. I
mhm,
like to say that if you say your best friend or your business partner steals from you, I say that you forgive them, but that doesn't mean that you have to stay best friends with them or even
mhm,
stay in business with them. Maybe
mhm.
it's time to call the police or an attorney and fight to get back what they stole from you. It just
Mhm.
means that um, you don't resolve the problem yourself. You let God
Yeah,
take care of it.
yeah, yeah. I think that that is probably one of the things that can be the hardest for people as well. And I know you have some other things as well. Is that forgiveness isn't just it's not going to directly heal you right away. You're going to have to work on that as
Right?
well, and it's something that we need God's help for. And I think you exhibited that so beautifully earlier in your story when you said, "God, I'm going to need you to help me do this,"
Mm-hmm.
and you had
Yeah.
no idea what was in front of you. Um,
I don't think we can forgive. It's not a do-it-yourself project.
mm,
Uh, I think I think one reason forgiveness is so hard is because it may be the most godlike thing that we ever do. I
mm,
can't think of anything that's more godlike than forgiving someone who forgiving
who hurt
December
you?
10th, for example. Yeah.
Forgiving December 10th,
Uh,
yeah.
and and we need God's help and his strength to do it.
How did you know that your forgiveness was real towards not only just your son, but also the shooter and the getaway driver?
The um, the proof was that night uh, when I realized that uh, all traces of anger and revenge and hatred were gone. But in the real
Mm,
world, where we don't
mhm,
have this miracle thing, the way you can tell that you've truly forgiven someone is if you can honestly pray a blessing over them.
mm,
That's when you know that you know Paul says bless them, do not curse them.
mm,
And if you have reached the point where you can pray their best life for that person, then uh, then you know that forgiveness is real. And I hadn't thought about it, but I guess that it, it describes my reaction to the two other kids.
mhm,
I
mhm,
really want the best life for them.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. And they were kids too. That's another
Yeah.
hard thing. You know, Kent, the story of your this forgiveness and your journey, it's not over. You're still on this journey. Your son Bart is still
Mm,
incarcerated and you still go
yeah.
visit him. But I want to real quick before we finish up this conversation to kind of bring the story full circle for the listener so we don't leave them
Yes.
hanging. Your son was given the death penalty and actually
Yes.
had an execution date for February of
Hmm.
2018. But he
Hmm.
wasn't executed. He's still alive and
Yeah.
incarcerated here in the state of Texas. Can you talk to me
Hmm.
about what happened in February of 2018?
Yes. The thing about Romans 8:28 is, it says that God will take all things and work them for good. Well, he works them for good within his big plan. He works it for good for other individuals, but he also works it for good for those that, for me, individuals. And he did that with Bart. Uh, the thing about trusting Romans 8:28 is that God does take uh, take our losses and work them for good within his huge plan. But he also works it for good for other people. But he works it directly for good for us. And he has done that in so many ways. And one of them involves Bart's commutation, because uh, the Texas Pardons and Parole Board looked at the 11 years of positive things, many positive things that Bart had accomplished while he was on death row, and came to the unanimous conclusion that a recommendation for commutation to life in prison was the proper uh, sentence here. And unless you live in Texas, I don't think you can truly appreciate what that means,
Mm-hmm.
because the parole board has never, ever voted unanimously
Mm-hmm.
to recommend a commutation of the death penalty. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, it had been 10 years since the previous commutation of a death penalty. It
Mm-hmm.
had been 10 years. And then they voted unanimously
Mm.
to recommend it. So uh, it was a huge miracle. And um, our governor eventually chose to follow their recommendation. And so he now has life in prison instead of execution. And that has given us more time for him to if he doesn't already have a relationship with Christ, to reach it.
Mm. Ken, I remember that day in February because Aaron and I were gathered in our kitchen watching Twitter, updating it ferociously as it was
Mm-hmm.
going by. I think we might have even sent in messages to the governor. And I just remember
Uh,
imagining you, because what people don't understand is this happened minutes before Bart was supposed to be
yeah,
executed. And so you had
yeah,
time with him and you went through an entire goodbye.
yeah. That was so hard, Jamie. You can't
Yeah.
imagine. Um, when there there was a 2-day period when the parole board recommended the commutation unanimously. Was
Mhm.
That was 2 days before the 6 p.m. execution, and
Mhm.
we kept expecting to hear from the governor that he was commuting, because how are you going to? I mean, he appointed these guys,
Yeah.
all seven of them, and uh,
Mhm.
and how can you appoint a parole board and then they vote unanimously on something
Uh-huh.
and ignore it? So we figured he had to commute, but it
Yeah.
didn't happen, and we got closer and closer. And the day of the execution, we had our goodbyes.
Mm.
We had our last visit through the glass, and I, Tanya and I were there, and she loves him dearly. She loves him so much, and we said goodbye, and we left, and it was 5 hours before the execution date, and we met in Huntsville where the execution would take place, and 30 minutes before he was to die, they'd already put the IV in his arm. He was already strapped down to the gurney, and 30 minutes before 6 o'clock, our attorney got a call from the governor saying that he had commuted the sentence. So it was it was a close thing.
I can't even imagine. I think I
Mm-hmm.
read somewhere, Kent, that your hope is that one day you'll get to hug your son again. And have you hugged
Yeah,
him since when was the last
the
time?
last time, the last opportunity I had to touch him was the night that I was on the treadmill when he went downstairs and out the front door. And I didn't do it then. I didn't know. I didn't know.
You didn't know.
But that was the last opportunity I had, and I have never touched him since.
Mm.
Um, and I'm praying that one day he will get a contact visit, he will be allowed a contact visit, and I'll be able to actually sit at a table and touch him again.
I hope that for you as well. I hope that for you as well.
Thank you, thank you.
Kent, I'm grateful for you sharing this story. I cannot even begin to imagine that this gets any easier, no matter how long it has gone by. And so I'm grateful for you letting us hear parts of your story. And I just love God more when I hear you talk about this.
Yes,
And I hope that
yeah,
is what our listeners are feeling as well. And so I'm
Ro-
grateful.
yeah, because that's the whole story of Romans 8:28. I don't care what's happened in your life. I mean, stuff happens to all of us, but whatever it is, my life is a living proof that Romans 8:28 is true. God truly will take all things, even December 10th, and he'll work them for good for those who love him and are called to his service. And that's the best news I can think of.
It's the best news I can think of as well. Kent, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. It has been such an honor and a pleasure. And it's just been an honor and pleasure. I've enjoyed this so much. Thank you.
I have as well. And Aaron said for me to tell you hello. I texted him earlier that I was going to be
Okay.
talking to you. And you know
Okay.
what I
Well,
always forget, Kent, is that Aaron flew home to sing at Trisha and Kevin's funeral.
yes, you did. Uh, I knew I wanted him there. He was such an important part of Bart of Kevin's life,
Yeah.
and Trisha loved him too.
Uh,
And so I reached out and asked him. I think he was on tour.
it
I
was,
don't
yeah.
remember if he was working for the church yet, or if he was out in y'all that bus that
We
y'all
lived
had.
in Nash.
Uh,
We lived in Nashville, and so he
that's
flew home
right.
for that.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And I asked him if he would sing, and he sang two songs. And I go back and look at that tape every once in a while, and I am just so grateful. It made such a difference to have him there.
Well,
I'm
what
so
an honor.
grateful
The
for
honor
that.
was his. The honor was his.
Yeah,
Kent, thank you so much.
yeah. Blessings to all of you. And uh, anyway, this is wonderful.
Hey, friends, I hope you love this conversation as much as I did. To make sure that you never miss any of the happy hour conversations, go ahead and hit the subscribe button below to make sure you're notified every time we release a new episode. And if you want more content today, click on those videos over there. I think you're going to like them just as much as you like the one today.